Welcome to Association Chat, a podcast devoted to talking about all things associations, nonprofits, and the future for building communities. In a world where there's an association for everything, that gives us a lot to talk about. So let's get started with your host, KiKi L'Italien. Thank you to podcastingforassociations.com for their help in the production of this podcast. Please join Podcasting for Associations Mike McCallan for a free PCMA webinar this August 20th. Go to Rebrandly, that's rebrand.ly/PCMA podcast and learn how to start engaging, educating, and informing your membership while making revenue for your association or membership-based community. This is going to be really good. So the Community Roundtable, it's a company dedicated to advancing the business of community. And the Community Roundtable collaborates with clients to develop proven practical strategies for better engagement. Clients rely on the CR's models, research, and networks to take their communities to the next level. And with me today, Rachel Happe, yay, co-founder, and I am in principal of the Community Roundtable. I have wanted to talk with Rachel and ask her questions for years, plural. So I am so excited that you are here today, Rachel. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And ditto, I obviously follow some of your work because we work with some associations on their communities. And so it's a growing segment of our business.
You know what? I have followed the Community Roundtable and the work that you do. Of course, anyone who is building community as part of their job, as part of their role, and or even cares about this discipline seriously, knows about the Community Roundtable, knows the good work that they do, the research, the studies, the reports, the critical reports that come out. And so recently, Association Chat, the community that I've been running for 10 years now, we celebrated 10 years, and I automatically started doing all these things you do around milestones, like thinking about how things started, where things have gone right or wrong, and lessons learned. And Community Roundtable has been around when I try to think back about when I first became aware of it, it was kind of at the beginning of Association Chat, I think, too. How long has it been around?
We're celebrating the same milestone. So we started in 2009 as well. So,
oh my gosh. I see, because I remember at the very beginning being like, ooh, what is this? Yes. Oh.
So you're not wrong.
Yeah. So, it's fascinating because you see trends. And right before we started recording, we started talking about how things have changed over time. And you were sharing with me from your perspective, it's fascinating because you get to see internal, external, you get to see the way that marketers look at social media and community versus communities that exist outside of social media. So talk to me a little bit about the trends you've been seeing, because that's what reminded me to hit record is, oh my gosh, this is so good.
Well, it's interesting because when we started, my perspective, I'm kind of an analyst by nature and by past roles. And one thing I didn't like about being a technology analyst is we were talking to all the vendors about what could be. And so that's a kind of a very theoretical conversation and not very grounded in reality. And what I wanted to do when I started is actually do research about what is actually going on the ground that is possible, because the theory and the practice were very divergent. And I also felt like we hadn't documented enough about how communities worked to start fragmenting to a specific industry or a specific use case. And I had a theory that they all had similar patterns, regardless of what the goal was in the end. And so I was purposely took a generalist view and said, what can we learn about communities globally versus how they apply here, there, and the other? But you're right, that has also given me a perspective across industry, across country, across use case that is kind of fascinating. And we see trends both in the research that we do and in our membership community and in the advisory work that we do. And together they give you a really good intuitive sense of what's going on and what's coming.
And so what are some of those trends that you're seeing?
Yeah. So we were talking earlier, like when we started, our primary client was a marketing communications customer support client, external communities for customers. And that was right when social media was really being incorporated into organizations. And there was a lot of excitement about its ability to connect people. That kind of got subsumed by the marketing communications traditional industry. And they were like, oh, look, we can do things exactly the way we've always done them, just faster. And everyone, the early adopters were like, no,
oh yeah,
no, what are we doing? And so social media really became this content engine. And at that time, you look at Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they follow the advertising model because that's where budgets were in marketing organizations. And so now it's become this huge content pay to play content engine. And it's lost that early luster of like, we can actually connect people and kind of co-create the future together. That's not what social media is today. And so, in those middle years, we didn't do as much work externally because people were kind of consumed with the content engine bit of social media. And we ended up focusing more on internal communities and culture change and learning and KM. And it turns out all of those things matter externally as well. And I laugh a lot because if you look externally, marketers really know how to speak to people and capture their attention, but they're kind of a mile wide and an inch deep some of the time. You go into internal people and they know governance and content management, and they can get wrapped around the axle of overstructuring everything and forget about communicating with people. So they're like a mile deep and an inch wide.
Yeah.
And the answer is somewhere in between for both of them.
I mean, it has been interesting to see. It's sort of like a pendulum swing, as people have gone really far into the what good is it? And so yes, at the very beginning, it was this beautiful belief that social media, the technology was there to bring us all together and to unite us. And I think those of us at the very beginning of that, still remember fondly, this idea. And we connected early on. We made friends and still have those friends to this day. We connected early on with people from all over the world who genuinely used this as, use these tools as a way to build community and connect. And then we're, very disappointed as we watched as things sort of slid into this more and more commercial, more and more marketing, more and more, sort of advertising laden communication. And I don't know, for a little bit, I think it was easy for people to think that online community was less community and more just advertising platform. And for a lot of communities, I feel like that's what it did become.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The pendulum is swinging. And I think part of that is the whole Cambridge Analytica, how people are now aware that they can be manipulated on these platforms. And a lot of people are just stopping their use because they're saturated in things that they don't care about and are making their lives worse, not better. And so marketers are looking at that and be like, maybe that wasn't what I wanted, right? Like,
right, right.
not actually doing the job that I needed it to. And oh, by the way, I can never get the good data out of these platforms that's going to really run my business. And so
right.
I quote John Day a lot. He's with IEEE.
I love IEEE. Yes.
So we did a little strategy work with him that then he parlayed and used to really build the case about why they needed an on-premise owned technology stack for their engagement. And he was like, those who own their engagement data will own the future. And I think, like Facebook will never give you the good data in the format that is really meaningful.
Yeah.
They will give you the data you need to buy more advertising, but not the data that's really going to tell you how behavior is changing.
Yeah. And I think that's such a fascinating opportunity that people underestimate. I think that they don't understand what is even possible. So there are two things that came up for me that I want to dig into more deeply as you were speaking, and one of them was about the role of trust and community, especially in light of Cambridge Analytica and even the challenges that are facing institutions that have been around forever. When we look at the police or the Catholic Church, or, just because .org is in your, domain name doesn't mean that people believe you anymore. And so I think that, I am very curious to find out what you have to say about that. But before I lose the other train of thought, the other thing I wanted to dig into more is, let's talk a little bit about why John Day was right when he said that. The owning your own data and being able to own the day, so to speak, is critical. But people, I think, don't understand what that can look like. So can you maybe talk a little bit about what's possible, like how you should be thinking more like John Day of IEEE?
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deeply because that's its own podcast. But from my perspective, marketing analytics are very tactical and very superficial. So the way data is structured and delivered to us is very transaction and content centric. So it's very easy to see how many people viewed something, right? Like that's the fundamental, I got 20,000 likes on that thing.
Right.
People viewed that thing. How fantastic.
Yeah.
But as we know in the space, that's kind of a vanity metric. Like,
totally.
It doesn't mean anything. Like, what does it mean? Like, did it change anybody? Did it make them do anything? Like, and so then what we really need to see is not a content-centric view of the world. I need a person-centric view of the world, right? I need to know what KiKi did for the past month in my domain. How many things did she read? Did she then go post something? Did she have a conversation? Who did she engage with? And the architecture of data is not oriented around individuals for the most part. And so companies have to extract all of that engagement data, pair it with CRM data to actually see those behavior flows. And the behavior flows are what drive conversion, for example, right? So I have this theory that it is my intuition, which is fairly good, but I don't have the data. But my intuition says that questions are the most important leading indicator of conversion. Because psychologically speaking, it means you have empowered somebody to own the solution, meaning they have proactively sought the solution rather than just accepted what is out there. They've gone out to seek something.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much.
So I want to know when people ask questions. Yeah. It doesn't even matter if they're answered. I mean, it does matter if they're answered because they won't ask more questions. But that is a turning point for engagement from receiving stuff to actively participating in it. And if you can empower people to participate, you've now decentralized leadership, right? They're taking a leadership role by doing that.
Oh my gosh. I am so like, I just got chills because curiosity is one of the core values of association chat, but I just hearing the way that you put it together as that being just a likely sign of the likelihood of engagement and then conversion for whatever goal it is that you're setting out to have. I think that's so true. And that made me immediately think, you know what? What if I went and I looked at the people who asked the most questions in the group and I sent them a handwritten letter? Like what would happen with that? I bet it would be wildly successful.
Right. And so then that comes back to data. As a community manager, I want to narrow in on the people who are asking the most questions, because those are the people I should cultivate relationships with. But in most community data, we can't see that without a lot of manipulation right now.
Yeah.
And Facebook is never going to give you that list.
No. And, so people who are out there listening and they're thinking, yeah, but, when I go into my insights, I can see engagement and those who are most engaged. Guys, engagement for Facebook means they clicked thumbs up. They, which is such a minimal level of engagement that it shouldn't even really count most of the time, right? Because it's not the same thing as a question. A question is so active.
Yes. And so that's a big beef of mine, which is like, what do you mean by engagement? You have to break that down because engagement is hundreds of behaviors. And so if you're not clear which engagement behavior matters and is meaningful to your goal, you just accept Twitter or Facebook's definition, well, they're after advertising, right? So that's not your goal.
Yeah.
So you need a different engagement measure. So yes, that's the crux of the problem.
I love this. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to go into was that question that I asked earlier, which was the trust question. Trust is such a big issue in building relationships. And right now, I'm not calling it a trust crisis, but it's definitely a situation where in society today, a lot of the things that we believed in or thought were true or, safe and trustworthy as we were maybe, children and growing up into adulthood, it's not the same anymore. We're questioning a lot of the things that were long held in that zone of trust. And so in this sort of state, when people don't trust the videos that they see, there are things like deep fakes that exist, what impact does that have in building community?
I mean, trust is everything, right? Trust is either the lubricant or the barrier to getting anything done.
Yeah.
And trust is socially mediated, right? So, and socially normed. We believe what the people around us that we trust confirms to be true. So,
yes.
Right? If you get stuck down a rabbit hole. And I always say a community gone bad is a cult, right? Because you can totally norm a really crazy idea. And if you don't have any ethical issues, you can have at it.
Right.
And so we actually need communities to build trust. And we need those communities to be ethical. Right. And so this is I often guide clients to be clear what engagement you want from your community so they can opt in. They know what you're going for, right? Don't bait and switch them because that's disorienting and
and they won't trust you.
In the end.
Right.
And this is the hard one for organizations, is people don't trust authority figures as much as their peers.
Right.
Because you're paid to have a position on something. And so there's a deep cynicism of that right now in society, because we have so many leaders who seem to be ethically challenged.
It is so interesting that a lot of the questions that I get with association chat when I'm reaching out to other, state societies to see about collaborating and things like that, their immediate go-to seems to be, what's in it for you? Like, how are you making money? And like kind of cynical, because it's, before we work with you, we want to know where the payoff is. And I mean, there is definitely a business case for community. There are so many actually business cases for community, but association chat was not built for that reason. And it's not something that has been a focus of mine. So I'm always kind of, put off a little bit by that question. And at first, when it was first asked, I was kind of not offended, but sad that it was viewed with suspicion, right?
Although I find that very clarifying.
Yeah. And I think it's important that organizations ask this question. I understand why they ask it, especially over time. I've discovered exactly why it's such an important question to ask. But
me, I think the word business, or the concept of business or business model, gets people kind of like defensive. But if you think about it more as clarity of purpose, then it's the only way to really negotiate a good relationship is to understand your boundaries and my boundaries, so that we know there's something that we're both motivated to do together. There's a shared purpose there, right? It's just translated into a financial statement rather than just a text statement.
Right. It's like, I kind of want to do this thing to bring the community more more together, but not thinking joint venture here. Like, let's step away from.
That there can be a fine answer in, I'm building this community because I think it's really important to X over the long term, and that's the goal. Like, there is no direct, like, I get something on Thursday because I chatted on Wednesday. Like, that's not like, so I think that's a fine business model, quote unquote. It's just clarifying that is super. It's one of the things we don't do well in relationships today. We take things for granted a lot of the time. And that's usually when we're making assumptions, or we're taking things for granted, is usually where we get messed up on the back end.
Is trust where you see a lot of communities go wrong? Where do people usually go wrong when it comes to creating sustainable community?
At the very beginning, usually. Because I often say perfection is the enemy of engagement. Because if I give you something complete, a complete thought, well-written, whatever, there's not much for you to add. Right?
Yes.
You can say that's great, but there's no co-ownership opportunity.
It's so true. It's like when you're a kid, say your grandparent did the puzzle and left like 2 pieces for you to put in there. How fun is that, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't feel good.
It's now effectively been controlled.
Exactly.
From people on the marketing communication side, there's a real anxiety about perfection, like getting the message correct. And so more often than not, we have a hard time giving up control and letting the community co-create with us, because that means we don't have 100% say in where we're going. And that freaks the heck out of most people.
Oh yeah. Me included, by the way. I mean, that's
It's hard.
scary. Yeah. And establishing the boundaries so that people understand what's okay and what's not okay. There's this element of education, there's ethics. That's like you want to make sure that things are, it's a safe space for people. But you want to encourage that messiness that comes with creativity and with allowing people the space to do something that may be different than what you had.
And you also have to know where your hard no's are and uphold them, which is hard too, to say, no, this community is not about that. And so having that mindset is super hard, especially like just systemically in our organizations. We're not designed for that. And I'll give you an example of like we did some work with the Canadian Medical Association, and like their mindset is just amazing, which is they decided that, they needed to engage in new ways. And they have something, I want to say 90,000 members. They have a lot of doctors across Canada that are members. And they were looking historically, and this is not different than a lot of associations, but they only deeply engaged with about 500 of them, meaning there was only the cream of the crop that actually had influence over their overall policies in a given year. And those people had been in the association for decades. And newer members didn't want to pay their dues either financially or time-wise. They want to be involved, and they have their own issues that they want to produce. And so what the CMA did is say, okay, we don't need just one community. We need an ecosystem of communities that really surrounds the organization and switches the engagement model of saying yes to 500 people to saying yes to 90,000, to the extent those people want to take on a topic and engage.
Oh, right? Fascinating. That's so cool.
When you think about the implications on your business model, you're like turning it upside down and saying, no, we're not a risk mitigator anymore. We're an opportunity seeker, right? We're not funneling you through the system until we get 500 people we can tolerate dealing with, because we only have so many staff. We're going to open it up to everyone and let all of you decide what's important.
Oh my gosh. So
what happened? They're in the process of figuring that out.
To be continued. My gosh.
It's messy, and it takes a while to really build the trust to do all of those things, but they've got the right mindset. Now, the struggle, if you have the right mindset, is not everybody else trusts that mindset. You can go out to an organization and say, I want to hear from you. And somebody can say, well, you've said that every year for 2 decades. And yet, you're in a position where you have to show people that you're co-creating together rather than telling them you're going to do it. And that takes a lot of time and patience to bear out, right? You have to do it with a small group initially so that they can show the next year. And so you have to grow very mindfully. And it tends to start very slowly because you're doing something very different that you have to get the members of the community comfortable with, and you have to get your internal staff comfortable with. And there's a lot of bumps along that road. And so you almost like, you want to throttle it rather than like invite everybody in, because you're really trying to craft the right culture there. You're not trying to just have a free for all.
Yeah. And it's sort of delicate because, I mean, there are going to be missteps, but you want to get it right in the beginning, but you don't want to wait for perfection, because perfection,
you want to, the way I would say it is, you want to get the process right. And again, people aren't focused on the process, they're focused on the output. So they'll look at early communities and say, well, what is it doing? And you're like, it doesn't matter if we're getting the behavior of the community correct and people are learning to trust each other and learning to ask questions and learning to like collaborate.
They're learning that behavior.
And again, going back to the data, if you can't see the behavior change, you can't actually see if you're doing that correctly in the data.
Yeah.
Like you have to use your intuition.
Oh, and that's scary for folks too, because, you know, they want to see. I love how your mind works, because you are marrying this analytical side with this intuitive, more, you know, this is how I relate to other people's side of things. And it's I think you need that when you're talking about relationships. We can automate a lot these days, but we can't automate trust. And so understanding the behavior and the psychology behind how people begin to trust you, how you can try to speed that up a bit. You know, people push back on me a lot when I start talking about being able to fast track trust, but I'm like, well, but con men do it all the time, right? And so you want to figure out how to get to the good stuff as quickly as possible. And so can you put out communication consistently on a regular basis over time, proving yourself over and over and over again? And the more consistent and more regular, and the more that people can come to predict that you're going to do that and be right, you're proving yourself faster. So that's a way to fast track.
Because of the way communities grow, they grow very slowly initially. They're really working on that behavior and culture piece. But I keep telling people it's like cooking risotto. It grows exponentially, right? And so once you get that early stage right, you rapidly get to inflection points where the community shows their peers that you are trustworthy, right? So you do scale that trust, and that is the value of community, is that people can trust the community without knowing every single person in it.
Yes. Yes. Well, so as far as where community is headed, based on what you're seeing, we were talking about the trends before and how things are sort of progressing and shifting in the way that, say, things have been in the past, 5 to 7, maybe 10 years. How things are shifting again. Do you see the role that communities play for, and I'll ask about associations specifically right now. Do you see the role that communities play for associations changing or shifting?
Yeah, I mean, in some areas, like I mentioned IEEE, I mentioned the Canadian Medical Association, they're thinking very differently about what community can do for them. And I will bring it back to something I see more generally, which is, to me, community is a governance structure, and our hierarchical organization models are breaking because of automation. And like, we just don't need the hierarchy anymore. And there was always a downside of the hierarchy, which is it was paternalistic, and we actually isolated ourselves from feedback. So executives are isolated in a hierarchy from the impact of their decisions. And that's a horribly risky place to be, especially when the market is moving really fast. And so I look at community as a governance structure of the organization. And I say, your organization is an ecosystem of communities, and a huge community with lots of other communities within it. And if you change your governance structure to this looser model, you can operate and change and adapt much more quickly, because you're meeting people at the edge where they are and solving their problems there, rather than bringing it all the way up the hierarchy and going all the way back. But again, it requires a really a loosening of control. And I finally figured out what to put on our t-shirts. for the CR about 5 years ago, and it's the statement, "Control is for amateurs."
I love that. I so need that
Because
t-shirt.
somebody
I
asked me at
so
some
need
point,
that
they were
t-shirt.
like, "Okay, well, if control is for amateurs, what's for professionals?" And I was like, "That's a good question." But I I answered, the difference is an S on control, right? You're operating from a
Mhm.
place with controls, but not controlling the individuals within it. And so
Yeah.
I think where we're going is changing the governance model, both internally and externally, of organizations and how we work with our markets. Because if you're really engaging your entire market or membership base, there will be no surprises, right? Like, you don't need market research because you're
Mhm.
getting real time data on what's going on and the topics that are coming up, and like, nothing should surprise you.
Yeah. Yeah, because that
Yeah,
communication is happening on an ongoing basis. It shouldn't catch you off guard because if you've got that relationship, somebody is talking, somebody's saying
yeah,
something or
it's
raising a
all
question.
there if you've built this trusted
Mhm.
engagement ecosystem where people feel validated and safe to say what they feel they need to.
When I'm going to take this from high level and then put it into a more tactical sort of zone for people who are listening and maybe they are thinking about, I am responsible for my community in trying to build that engagement, and I've noticed that it's gotten
Mm.
quiet, that and I feel uninspired to jostle, like, on how to jostle things up and rev up conversation. What are some of your maybe tips for from your experience that you've seen to help build curiosity and build engagement within a
Yeah, so I
community?
typically will look at that in two different ways, which is, do you have a strategic
Uh-huh.
problem or do you have a tactical problem? If no one is coming to the community, meaning they're just not, it's not on uh, their list of things to do, then you generally have a strategic
Mhm.
problem, right? Like, you don't have a call to action that is meaningful to them. We are here to do X that is aspirational and energizing. Like, what problem do they need to solve? What
Right.
opportunity do they want to solve together? You're not inspiring them to come to the community, because you may have a community that we're like, this is a community where we're here to engage, and people are like, I don't need to. Like, I don't need one more place to engage. Thanks. So that's a strategic problem, right?
Right.
Like, you haven't defined a goal
Mhm.
and an objective for the community that's engaging. If, however, they're coming, but they're not engaging, that's usually a community management programming problem, right? Like, you're not making it easy enough to engage. So the example there
Right.
is, do you have a question of the week every week? Are you actively creating association chat? Is an example of a program. Like, you do something on a repeatable basis that becomes a routine or a habit of the community, where they know this is how to engage and this is what they're going to get back for it. And you're making sure they're
Right.
also rewarded when they do that, either by social validation or something else. And so
Yeah.
those are the two things I think about. And if you really have a dead community, you probably do need a strategic refresh, and then you sort of need a reboot. Like, you need to restart the community almost and create a smaller cluster of people that starts engaging around the updated strategy, and then shows people that they can trust the community as a place to actually have that conversation and have it be impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way that you organized that, because it's definitely, there can be so many reasons why you're not seeing engagement, but are they even getting there in the first place? And, if they're not, that could be a strategic problem. But if they are there and they're just not engaging, what can you do to, help them to learn that that's a trustworthy place? It's something that they want to engage in, that's worth their time. And it's easy. It's easy for them to do it too.
All, like, motivation and behavior is such a complicated set of things, but and here's where I'll give Facebook credit. They have invested a lot in learning how to engage people. And so there's a lot of new, I point people towards BJ Fogg all the time.
I love
great work in this
BJ
space,
Fogg.
But it's a complicated thing, and it's not just inclusive of the community itself. Meaning, the whole if you're a member of an association, the whole entire way the association engages you impacts your behavior inside the community, because people know that there's motivators out, like there's umbrella motivators to the community piece.
That's so true. That's so true. You had mentioned before about how people trust their peers more, and because more than looking at like a figurehead or somebody in a hierarchical sort of position of power. And for a while, now it has this horrible influencer marketing sort of name, but influencers who are, people who are the peers that you look to and you say, I trust what they, I kind of trust what they say. I will read what they suggest. I will, participate. If they say it's good, I'm probably going to try it. And what have you learned about the role that influencers, or we can call them something else, but the influencers play in a community?
Well, I'll answer it a little bit of a different way, which is, orthogonally a little bit, which is like, if you have a pile of sand, it's never going to become glass without a catalyst, right? So if you get a bunch of people that are exactly like each other into a community, it's going to be very hard to engage them, because they all know the same things. Making assumptions about each other is kind of dicey politically. And so you need diversity in a community to get engagement. And so when we go in and talk to a client about strategy, we identify their target member, like who's the primary member of this community that's going to benefit from it. And then we look at everybody in their life that they interact with and who they interact with and pay attention to the most. And we kind of say, if the top 2 or 3 of those people are not in the community, you're going to have a hard time capturing their attention. And so those people don't necessarily need to be members, but they need to be brought in for webinars or AMAs, or like they need to show up in the community somehow, because those are the people that are already capturing your members' attention. And so those are the influencers. And in a work setting, they're a little different than the popular kids, right? They're the people who you open their emails when they send you an email, right? Like they're the people you interact with a lot, because they're critical to getting your job done. And so they look a little like, I think of influencers a little bit differently that way. They're not always just peers, although they can be. They're subject matter experts and bosses and heads of associations. And, there's a lot of different variety within that group. And you need to include them all, or not all of them, but a good portion of them, in order to get the attention of your members and to get them truly engaged. And so I don't know if that really answers your question.
It does. It does. This this interview is just flowing so well because I I have to say that for and I don't know why we haven't had this discussion before now, but after years of thinking it would be great to meet you and ask you these questions,
Oh,
you do not disappoint, Rachel. You do not disappoint. Just such a brilliant mind
I don't know about
and so much fun to talk with. Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. And so many quotable moments. Like I am going to have a really easy time going through and figuring out like what I want to pick out and share with people. I guess, before I wrap up this interview and turn off the record button, I guess the thing that I want to ask is, you know, what got you into this, into committing so much of your career and life into exploring community? Is it what got you into it, and what's keeping you in it today?
it's a big question, but my father was a
Yeah.
congregational minister, and in that church, the congregation hires and fires its minister, meaning you don't have top down authority at all. And he used to
Yeah.
hold deacons meetings, which is the operating committee for the church, in our living room. And when I was 6 or 7, I used to sit in deacons meetings, and they thought that was innocuous enough. And I didn't really care what they were talking about, but I was fascinated by the power dynamics. And so that's something that's always
Mhm.
really fascinated me. At the same time, my mother was a community activist. So she was running the Nestle boycott back in the 70s and 80s. And so I grew up with these alternative leadership and management approaches. And I went to school and I ended up studying politics, not surprisingly, because I like power dynamics and international relations. And then I lived in DC for a couple of years and worked in the government. And I was like, oh no, bureaucracy is not okay. I can't do that. And I ended up at a management consulting firm that did innovation and new product development management. And that was just fascinating to
Mm.
me because I have found over time that my passion is in enabling potential. So I love the idea of new products that like offer new solutions. I love mentoring people and seeing them thrive and come into their own. So I just love I can't get enough of seeing people thrive and learn to be assertive and all of those things. But I worked at this management consulting firm, and then they spun off a technology company. So I was building innovation management, ideation, new product development, portal technology in the late 90s. And then I went out to Silicon Valley and I was working in an e-payments company for a while. But as I was doing that, we were also experimenting with social networks. And it was the Friendster, LinkedIn era of Orkut, all of those things. So I got really familiar with that. And from there, IDC hired me to cover the social software space. So I was the first analyst covering that technology market space. And I didn't really like being an analyst because I had drank my own Kool-Aid, and my operations background from the management consulting world and my technology background and this management and leadership background that I had from childhood came together, and I was like, oh my God, this changes everything. Like everything is going to change. And people
Mm.
have no idea. This was 2007. And I was like, people have no idea they're opening this garden gate, and they have no idea that it's going to slam behind them and it's going to disrupt their entire organization, and they're not going to know how to deal with it because they
Mhm.
haven't changed their culture, they haven't changed their approach to leadership, yada yada yada. And so that's why I started this, because I I never thought I was going to start a company, but I had a unique perspective on the market, as does my co-founder, Jim Storr, who was building early communities. And it was just an opportunity that fit my unique set of experiences really well. And I was like, I saw things that other people didn't see because of it. What keeps me in the space is, and this may be self-serving and it may be like whatever, but I see so much anxiety and isolation and distrust and misery. And I think the entire problem is lack of community, because I think people need what communities offer people that you don't get from one-to-one relationships always is they need support when they need support, and they also need to be challenged to be their best self. And they need that from different people at different times. So, one person is not enough. One person may have a lens on one thing that you're doing, but not all the things that you're doing in your life. But communities are rich enough that they can give you that support and challenge whenever you need it, when you need it. And so I just think they're essential to us being able to be whole people. And I see that as causing so many issues in the world today. So that's kind of what keeps me in it.
I love it. What a wonderful, enriching, inspiring conversation. I hope that you will agree to let me interview you again sometime. Please say yes. I'm asking ahead of time and putting you on the spot, because there are so many other questions I have to ask, but I'm
in DC all the time.
Don't want to take you up for all time.
Do something down in DC. Get together.
Yes, we definitely should. So I want to say thank you for joining me today on Association Chat. Thanks for listening to this episode of Association Chat. If you like it, please subscribe, or better yet, tell a friend. You can join the Association Chat book club or support Association Chat by visiting Association Chat's Patreon site. You can also find more information about live events, private communities, special projects, and more on associationchat.com. See you next time. Hey, Association Chat is in its 10th year and independently owned and produced by me, KiKi L'Italien, and a very small crew of freelancers and volunteers. We appreciate our sponsors like you wouldn't believe. So I want to give a special thanks to all of our sponsors. Today, that includes Boulder, Event Waves, and Amplified Growth. Thanks to all of you. And if you want to find out more about sponsorship, then go to associationchat.com or email me, kiki@amplifiedgrowth.net, and we'll be happy to talk with you. All right. Thanks.